Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more. Hey everyone, today on Soundbites we have a great guest, John McDonald. John is the founder of The Good, a digital experience optimization company that works with some of the largest household names in tech, apparel, and beverages. He's the author of multiple books, including his latest one, which just released last month, that's called Behind the Click, where he dives into the psychological forces that shape online behavior. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, we wanted to jump in to, what we're calling the superhero backstory. Like, what is the origin story? What sent you down the path? You have a really interesting background, worked with some amazing brands, but what got you down this path?
Well, I've been really fortunate ever since I was in college. Actually, I majored in both computer science and visual arts. So I've always been really
Good
concerned
combo.
about the user interface. I was the guy in comp sci who everyone else would complete their projects in the computer lab and leave. I was there making it look good. So functionally, I'd pass and then I'd like spend time on the user interface. And I really got to have a love for that, which really kind of took me down the road post graduation into building applications and websites with Flash, which obviously isn't around anymore. That kind of dates me, right? I've run the Good for 15 years now. So had a career before that as well. But Flash is that perfect, or was that perfect building block for both of those, right? Um, but what I quickly realized is that folks were taking advantage of Flash to make things really cool, and I'll put that in air quotes, but it wasn't very usable, right? They were reinventing the user experience and expectations for users on every single site. Consumer would have to sit there. Do I scroll? Is this a side scroll? What do I click on? There were just no conventions. And this is also around the time that like Stephen Krug came out with Don't Make Me Think. Great book that like the whole premise is, if you aren't familiar with it, that consumers have an understanding of how to use the internet, and when you make them think too much, you change those preconceived notions, you're adding barriers to the process. You're going to have people drop off and be frustrated, and then all around just negative intent at that point, right? So from all of that experience, I wear a size 16 shoe. It's hard to tell, I'm 6'7". And yeah, and I was just growing so frustrated I couldn't find shoes in my size. And the problem was I would get disappointed because I'd go to like Nike's website and I'd find a shoe that I like, but you couldn't filter by size. And it was really, really frustrating for me. And I had a company, The Good, had just started, and we were building e-commerce websites. And I decided what we were going to do was not just build the website, but also avoid all of those bad online experiences. And that's how we got our name, The Good. Our mission at The Good is to remove all the bad online experiences until only the good remain. And what I found was we were building e-commerce websites, but they all had challenges that were similar to my personal challenge. And what I found was the missing piece is we weren't talking to consumers. Brands weren't talking to the users of these sites. And so we added on very quickly after we started, within a few months, to all of our engagements, we would do what we call continual optimization. Back then, there was no such term as conversion rate optimization or digital journey optimization. And we were one of the first to do this. And I found that we were actually getting a lot of clients because of this. So I went on a big tour around the country interviewing clients that we were working with. One of them was Nike. We were very fortunate. I went to Nike with the story of, hey, I tried to buy your shoes. Let us help us optimize your site. Which was awesome and worked surprisingly to me. I didn't think they would give a crap about me as a consumer, one guy here, but
That's a big win. Like, that is huge to grab a big brand like that early. And what they would have seen as, just a random edge case is not really an edge case. It is a complete usability problem that people with a size 11 shoe, size 10 shoe just didn't experience, didn't have. They didn't think to even look behind that door, let alone realize it was a problem for 30% of their audience.
it was shocking, and a lot of the folks I spoke to there were also kind of shocked to hear the story, which was surprising. And I think that's how I got in. And I had no business being in that room at that point in time. We didn't know a whole lot about optimization. We were still learning, and it wasn't really even an industry, but it worked. And
Mhm.
what I decided to do was take that little nugget that, yes, there's a need here. Yes, there's a pain on the consumer side and a need on the business side. So what are we going to do? Well, I went around and I interviewed all of our clients and said, "Hey, why did you hire us?" And I kept hearing the same story from them over and over. Anyone can build me a website. Development is becoming a commodity. Let's be honest, a lot of the brands that we worked with could have cared less about the technical underpinnings of their site and that it was built well. I could have given them two tin cans with a string between it. And as long as it processed a credit card, they would have been happy. But everybody that was hiring us because we did continual optimization. We baked that into everything we did. So we pretty quickly decided to pivot the good to being what at the time um, it came out to be conversion rate optimization.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of the genesis of the good, and really building into that. We have since continued to evolve to digital journey optimization. Same kind of thing has happened. Conversion rate optimization is becoming a commodity. We needed to kind of pivot a little bit as that has become the land, I like to call it, of like Twitter bros. Right? There's a whole bunch of tech kids in their 20s on Twitter who say, "I'll do conversion optimization on your site for $2,000 a month." That's just not a sustainable business, especially for a company that's been around as long as we have.
Mhm.
So we have really focused on going up market and focusing more on what we're calling digital journey optimization, not just focusing on that conversion point, but making sure that you have a great digital journey across the entire digital ecosystem for a brand.
How are the brands that you're working with responding to that? Because I feel like in marketing, there's so many buzzwords, there's so many like tools and new ways of approaching things. Everyone's just getting their heads around like conversion rate optimization. Now it's like we're talking about journey. So how are you explaining that to customers, and how are they
Mhm.
um receiving that, not new concept, but sort of new approach that you're taking?
It is definitely a new approach. And it's one that when I explain it to them, typically they go, "Yeah, I guess that does make sense." The challenge is, if you focus just on the conversion rate, you
Mhm.
are really going to do a lot of things that might be bad for the brand in the long term, right? You are going to annoy the customer
Yeah.
by continuing to market to them once they get to your site. Really, the idea here is that once somebody has gotten to your site, your marketing has won. It is now time to start fulfilling that customer's needs, with the eventual goal of converting, of selling, right? But consumers are only at your website for two reasons. That's to research and understand if you can solve their pain or need. And if you can, to convert as quickly and easily as possible and get on with their lives,
Mhm.
right? Nobody's at Nike's website to hang out. Let's be honest. I mean, there might be some sneakerheads out there looking for the latest release, but they're not going to Nike's website to get those. They have
No.
underground, they have
For
the shoe
sure.
store up the street that is that, focuses just on the latest Air Force Ones, right? So, really, the reality here is that consumers, really just want to accomplish their task and move on. And, they're, you need to facilitate that. And that might lead to a conversion, but if you only focus on converting, you're not going to be as helpful for the consumer. And that's where brands really need to focus, is on that larger digital journey. And we kind of decided a couple years back that focusing just on conversion optimization meant that it was in the name. We were focused, brands expected their conversion rate to go up. But when you do this right, it impacts a lot of metrics: average order value, reduced returns, reduced
Mhm.
customer service inquiries. You would look at, a lot of marketers want more time on site. I argue less time on site's better.
Mhm.
Get them in, get them out,
Yep.
right? You've served their needs better. So it's really kind of flipping the convention on its head a little bit here, and that seems to be resonating quite well, especially with larger brands, right?
For sure.
So
Yeah,
And
I
I think
think
that,
what you say is really interesting because like I feel like many times you hit two different kinds of websites. One that's like very beautiful, but maybe not
Mhm.
function like it doesn't function or isn't as helpful as you would want to get you in and out, like you're saying. And then there's one that continues to market you and hits you over the head with promos and pop-ups and cross-selling and upselling. You're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to buy the thing. Like I don't want to name any websites, but just like let me buy the thing and stop bothering me.
Right.
And so it sounds like you're really trying to hit that sweet spot where it's like, hey, we want to sell you a product, which is great, but we also
Mhm.
want to deliver on our brand promise and not maybe do harm to our brand inadvertently at the sake of conversion rate optimization. So
Yeah. Look, I mean, every element on a website it really tells the customer something about why they do or do not want to buy from you. And I think that if your site confuses them, they're just going to look elsewhere.
Mhm.
And so the key is to be able to recognize these moments along that digital journey and then pinpoint what causes them to purchase at that deeper level. And that's really where I've been focusing the last 2 years or so as well.
And I think the concepts work, whether it's a B2B sale or B2C sale,
Hmm.
direct to consumer sale. And a term that we were introduced to over the last couple of months is the pitch slap. It's like, you mentioned your marketing's worked. It's got someone to the web page,
Hmm.
or it's got someone to drive to your call to action. And while they're making that decision, while you're giving them the right information, while they're seeing what they need to see to make their decision, you're immediately slapping them with a pitch. You're hitting them across all
Hmm.
platforms. You're leveraging your omni-channel presence to almost sensory abuse this person versus
Yes.
trying to guide them along the journey effectively.
Well, this is exactly what marketers typically get wrong in the digital journey. And I actually covered this in my very first book. It's been a handful of years now, but it was called Stop Marketing, Start Selling. And, at the time, that was a really unpopular opinion because marketers ran e commerce. And I'm a firm believer that if sales teams were the original teams behind e commerce, we'd have a completely different, more usable internet. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, marketers, fortunately, I mean, I'm not here to bash anyone, but I will say I think that marketers are marketers. They want to market and they continue to do it when somebody gets to the site. But the most common concern with marketing and digital experience is that they just continue to market to people when they get to the site. So the reality is that, as I said earlier, the marketing's won, right? They can stop. And it needs to switch to um, providing that best digital experience that you can. And that means addressing the only two reasons they're at your site, as I mentioned. And um, but unfortunately, it often shows up in the ways that you mentioned, Lauren. It's things like negative intent shaming, right? Where they put up a pop-up and then say, enter your email here for 15% off, which is already devaluing your brand before I even know if I want to purchase. Because now I'm not looking at your products as, oh, they're worth what you list them at. I'm thinking they're worth 15% less right off the top.
mm,
Mhm.
But then you also say, for me to close that pop up, I have to click something that says, no, I don't like discounts,
right,
and I'm
right.
like, "Mm, okay, well, I don't know if I
We
like your
feel bad.
discount.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that there's a whole bunch of those type of psychological principles like negative intent shaming, et cetera, that really keep coming up. Um, and that's where I've really focused a lot of my research and why I wrote the latest book, Behind the Click, that you had mentioned earlier, Derek.
Yeah, so let's go dive into that. So let's talk
Hmm.
about that psychology of design and that motivation behind the book. And let's dive into a lot of topics here all at once. What are some of those tactics that you're using to help people along that digital journey optimization versus what we just explained?
Well, I think that there's actually the reason I wrote Behind the Click, if we back up from that, is I didn't really want to focus on tactics with this book. I wanted people to understand why. Because what's happening with conversion optimization and just optimization of e commerce and SaaS in general is there's a ton of tactics floating around right now. There's a ton of checklists, there's a ton of just unabated, do this to your site and it will improve. And the reality is that most of the people consuming those things are smaller, maybe mid-sized brands. Okay. Because the enterprise brands, the larger brands, have an understanding of their customers and they have the resources to talk to their customers and do different types of experimentation beyond A/B testing.
Mhm.
But for those smaller and mid-sized brands, they have no understanding of what's happening behind the scenes with the consumer and their psychological state of mind, what they're going through at each of these steps. And they hardly talk to their consumers. There's this kind of wave where, to start, before you start a company, a lot of people will talk to a ton of consumers to validate the idea. They all hear this, lean startup methodology was really popular for a while, right? And so they all have this unfortunate wave where they start by talking to their consumers, then they dip down where they're like, oh, I know this is a product they want, so now I'm going to focus on just selling it to them and come up with the right marketing message, and I know what I need to say, right? Because I had the idea, I know everything, I'm going to market it. And then, it might sell, but then they don't scale. So once they don't scale, then they start talking to consumers again because they're like, oh, what did I miss? Right? Then they get really large or mid-size, they start growing in enterprise. And then you get to that size and you have so many processes, you have so many internal politics. You have that hippo, the highest paid person in the room, who will just come in and say, I'm the VP here, this is what we should do. Right. And the challenge with all of that is that as you get on the bigger end too, they forget to talk to consumers. It just doesn't become part of the process. And so having a good understanding of all those psychological principles is really good for both ends of that spectrum. Those folks who are in that trough trying to scale, and also the enterprise brands who have forgotten their connection to their consumers.
Yeah, and I think that's the rule over the exception. Like what you just explained, it makes me smile because you see it over and over again. It's just like, and you think of the concept of what got us here won't get us there, that kind of thing. People get to a certain point and they're like, well, if we just keep doing more of this, it's not having a linear response up anymore. So they have to go almost back to the drawing board and think, what did we miss? And it's like, well, it's not that you missed something. It's that you stopped asking that question. You stopped being curious. You started thinking you know things versus testing. And then there's that situation where we see a lot of people treat their customer as one segment versus different segments, or treat them differently based on where they are in their journey, right? Do you see that as well?
100% I do. I think that, realizing the decisions online are not logical really means that you have to understand the psychological principles for all of your personas. Who are the folks that are your target markets? And there's going to be more than one, most likely. Although the more niche your product is, likely you're going to have fewer. And I see that happening, especially in e-commerce these days. SaaS has been doing this for years, where we're solving a very particular problem, right? Now, often they have a hard time expressing that problem because you go to a lot of SaaS websites and I'm like, what the heck do you do? Like,
what is
I
your
don't know.
value prop?
Right. And it's because they're using language and they're trying to sell to that small market. It's still who understands, goes there and is like, oh yeah, I get it. Or they heard from a friend, oh, that's solving that problem, I should use that too. I mean, we were just talking about podcast software before this, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, what tools should we use? How is that compared to what I'm using? Right. That's what most brands have relied on in SaaS. But in e-commerce, they don't really have that opportunity because consumers who come to the site come with baggage. They heard about it through a friend. They saw a review on TikTok. They Googled something and landed on an ad or a landing page, whatever it might be. But they come there from something else. Very, very few are coming direct traffic to a product detail page. It's very few people are doing that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think about what's that journey before somebody even gets to your site. And that means what kind of mental state are they in? What questions do they have? Are they already far along in things like decision fatigue? Like, do they have 20 browsers up? Right. And in the book, I talk about there's two types of shoppers, and this is for ecom or SaaS, but there's the satisfiers and the maximizers. Okay.
Hmm.
So the satisfiers are the folks who they just want to get a job done. And as soon as they find the solution, they're done. Right. They're like, I found the solution. I know this might not be the cheapest, might not be the best, but it's going to solve my problem. I'm moving on to the next thing. Okay. We all do this all day. We go grocery shopping. We're like, yeah, okay, there might be 5 options, but whatever. That milk is milk. Let's go. Right. So the other option is the maximizers. These are the people who are doing a ton of research, right? They're looking for the best backpack they can buy, and it's got to have this pocket and that pocket and do this and do that and weigh so much. And I want the right color and whatever. They're just opening 100 browser tabs. And these folks aren't as easily overwhelmed, but they do have decision fatigue very quickly, meaning they're starting to now have to decide, oh, I've done all this research. Now I got to start looking at all these and how do I compare? And they get tired and then they're like, oh, I'll come back to it. Well, the sad news is most people don't. But or they just give up and say, oh, this is good enough because they just can't anymore. Right. So you have to understand, how are you helping people do things like filter, right? Like I would get decision fatigue all the time on Nike's website because I would click on a shoe and then that I really thought was cool. And then I'd be like, oh, it only goes up to a size 12. And then I have negative connotation to the brand, right? Because I'm like, come on, Nike, like stop playing with my emotions like this. Like just give me the shoe that I want. Or tell me what are the 2 pairs I can choose between and be done with it. So there's a lot of these psychological principles. I mean, 300 pages of them here that I wrote about actually. So yeah.
Do you see that behavior sort of changing based on like the price point or category? I think I can make quick decisions on certain things, but then some things guilty. I have so many tabs open. I'm like, oh, let me do a comparison on spec and color and availability, all that stuff. So do you see that, where people can be two of those, psychological types at once, or not at once, but like depending on the situation?
Unfortunately, no. I think it has more to do with the phase that they're in and how far they go down those phases. Okay. So there's really 4 phases that I break down in the book. The first is discovery, right? And so this is where customers are going to form those initial impressions, right? And it may be, again, that they're just a satisfier and they say, you know what? That initial impression is good enough. I'm good to go. Right. And that would be really what you're asking about, which is how much effort do people put into this. Is if it's a higher price product, do they put more effort in? I think that they might go further down the journey in terms of how much effort they're willing to put in before they convert. Okay. So the second phase is really that information gathering phase, and this is really the point of the digital journey where customers move beyond thinking this might be what I'm looking for, and then they start digging into the details. Okay. So of course they have to be interested enough to want to do that. Now, let's say you're buying we've done a lot of work over the years or used to with Mastercraft boats. If you're not familiar with boats, it's fine. But Mastercraft, just know it's a premium, several $100,000 boat, sport boat. Okay. And, you can customize everything down to the stitching color. Right. So there's like the permutations of what you can do on a model of these boats is like in the like 6 to 7 figures. Right. So it really is someplace where people can get decision fatigue, but a lot of times they don't even get that far because they're just saying, yeah, this might be what I'm looking for. What do you have in stock? Or they go to a dealer and just like, I'll buy the one off the lot. Right. Because to them, they're solving that problem. But there are other people who really move into that decision making and conversion phase. They gather all the information that they need, and then they want to make a decision. So, wow, like I really want to make a 70s teal colored boat, like I want a throwback. Like that's going to be a lot of fun on the river this week, And so they start really thinking about things like that. And then the final phase that people always go through, no matter what your stage is, unless you truly are just buying a pure commodity. Okay.
Yeah.
And you just don't care, like picking that jug of milk off the shelf and you're like, it is what it is, right? Is the post-purchase phase. And this is where I think a lot of brands fall down because they don't realize that conversions don't stop at the checkout. Okay. A great digital experience is going to follow all the way through, which means long after that product or service has been delivered. I think that's what a lot of folks neglect. This is everything from that confirmation email to unboxing to in SaaS, the platform login, right? What's that
Mhm.
guided experience you're going to give me after? And this can either validate the customer's choice or trigger a type of regret, right?
Yeah.
Which you don't want when you have people sign up for a free trial, for instance.
Yeah, anything that's product-led growth, you might not have a salesperson in there pitching the product
Mhm.
anymore. The whole experience is what's going to drive the person to decide whether I'm paying a lot of money
Mhm.
per month for this type of tool, or if it's
Mhm.
like, man, did I make a massive mistake buying this, and do
Yeah,
I need to go look for a competitor?
for sure. I talk about two specific psychological principles in that phase. The first is recency effect. And this is the idea that we're most likely to remember the last thing that we saw. So if we're logging in and immediately we're like, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, that's the last thing I'm going to remember. I might not come back, especially if it's a free trial. I might just be like, this is too difficult to use. I'm out. Let me find a better solution. The second is what we call the observer expectancy effect. And this is that a lot of people will change their behavior when they're aware they're being observed. And this really is kind of one of those things where a guided onboarding is awesome because people are like, well, I can't be too negative because the person's right here guiding me through this. And I don't want to insult them. I don't want to hurt their feelings. So in terms of SaaS, that's something that seems to work extremely well. And you're seeing a lot more SaaS offer this, right? Like even if it's $29 a month, they'll say, hey, I'll do a private call with you, help you get set up.
Yeah.
Right. And that's to kind of make sure that we're getting people over that initial hump.
I think Klaviyo has done a really nice job having like a 3-month onboarding period for this exact
Mhm.
reason. And we've seen so many people. MailChimp, by the way, has actually gotten better from what we've seen. But
Mhm.
3 years ago, it was really tough. It was a bad tool to use. So people had that experience that was so negative, and then they're like, "Well,
Mhm.
why am I going to go to this other tool? It's going to be terrible too." And Klaviyo grabbed them and like handheld them through making these flows. Another
Mhm.
bad example, or another example of bad, is we have a lot of people that are trying to use Google Analytics, just basic Google Analytics, but the experience is so terrible they don't
Mhm.
even use it at all.
Yeah, they
Right?
screwed up GA4 for real.
Yeah.
I am not the most happy about that, considering we use data for everything we do. And, but I also think that it has helped a lot of folks who know how to use data. They didn't really use GA anyways. It was kind of just a finger in the air type situation, like,
Mhm.
oh, which way is the wind blowing? It's not a this is truth. Because let's be honest, GA has always been sampled data.
Mhm.
It's never been 100%, unless you paid, and that's still the case now. If you pay for premium service with analytics, you're great. But I think that in terms of all the data tools that are out there, GA is great if you don't have any other options and you want to get started. I think that's fine. But if you really want to be serious about your data, you're probably not in there anyways. And that's the rub, is that GA is great for small and medium businesses, but they've made it really difficult for them to use.
Yeah. It's so tough. And that all reminds me, while we're talking about that kind of data, you've been at the game for a long time now, and one of the big transitions you have likely seen, or two big transitions, would have
Mhm.
been people moving toward more platforms, but more than that, people moving from a desktop first experience to mobile first on a lot
Mhm.
of your brands. How have you navigated that, and what are some of the success stories and pitfalls for people in that space?
Well, you are correct in that when we started this game, in terms of building e-commerce websites, I quickly saw that it was going in that direction of, at the time, Magento was the biggest platform and it required a developer.
Mhm.
You could not build a really good e-commerce site without a developer. And it was, let's be honest, it was overly complicated.
Yeah.
It did not need to be complicated. And that's kind of why it sold in a fire sale to Adobe, right? It's become Adobe Commerce. Um, but, and that's also why now you can go to Shopify and within 15 minutes have a site set up. That was a pain point people had. And I think that e-commerce development is a commodity now. It is very clearly a commodity. You just need basic front end development skills, which almost anyone can learn and teach themselves. It's not overly complicated. Um, you can pick up a book on front end development and or do a bunch of online courses now that are really really easy to get through. The concepts aren't hard to grasp. You just got to speak the language, right? And so almost anyone can now go in and modify their e-commerce site on a platform like a Shopify or BigCommerce. The challenge we've seen with that is that because it's so easy to modify, a lot of people do it without having data to back it up or having any reason other than, I feel like in my gut, this is what I should do. And so it's a double edged sword for them because, on one hand, I love that it makes it easy for them to try to make the web a better place. Yes, help me with that mission of removing all the bad online experiences. But on the other side of that, they often create more barriers instead of reducing barriers.
Yeah.
And so, that's I to me, it's an unfortunate situation. I kind of want to put more tools in the hands of the smaller businesses, but I also want them to do it correctly, which is a hard space to be in. Um, and that's why I keep writing books. I keep putting this. We share at The Good. We share everything that we do. You just go to thegood.com, click on insights. We have 15 years. It's like an encyclopedia of optimization. Everything is up there. And we're sharing everything we do, all of our IP, our models, all this stuff we've come up with because we're on this mission, right? Now, if you want us to apply that directly to your brand or your site, you need to pay for that. But that's the 1% of people who come to our site. The 99% are going to take that and do something hopefully positive with that information. And so that's still good for, as far as I'm concerned. Now, desktop versus mobile, I think was the second part of your
Yeah.
question. We have definitely seen the majority of traffic go to mobile, and that's great. I mean, here's the thing about optimization is technology is always changing. Trends are always changing. Consumer behaviors are always changing, right? What the outcomes of what they do. Now, the psychological principles don't change, but how those become actions often do, right? Because they get influenced by different technology tools, trends, etc. So this doesn't bother me, and in fact, I, as a primary device, is my phone most of the time, and I'm okay with that. Now, I will say that the vast majority of purchases still happen on desktop. So I think this is something where a lot of people get overzealous and they say, oh, mobile traffic's way up. Yeah, it is. And you need to have a great mobile experience. But when it comes down to somebody who is that maximizer who's doing all this research, I promise you they're not doing all that research on their phone. They're just not. Like, let's be honest. Opening
Yeah.
100 browser tabs on your phone, you just are like, where was I? What am I doing?
Yeah.
So
I was thinking about that. And I think I'm a living meme at this point when it comes to a millennial who's like, "Oh, I got to make a big purchase. I can't do that on my phone. I got to pull out
mhm,
the laptop." I can't
mhm,
fathom making like a big purchase or even something that, to your point, like I've done a lot of research on. There's no way
mhm.
I'm pulling the trigger on my phone.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a bit of a stereotype for my age group, but I
Yeah.
can't picture it.
Well, look, I'm 43, so I'm firmly planted in that. I will say though that like, uh, you know, it's interesting. I have a 7-year-old son, and he is growing up with an iPad in his hands.
Yeah.
And I do think there will be a shift where he's just, like I. it's interesting. I was sitting on the sofa with my laptop the other day, and he came home from school, and he was like, "Hey, Dad, can you search for something?" And he was like trying to touch the screen, and I'm like, "No, this isn't an iPad, buddy. You got to type it in." And he's like, "Okay, can we type in?" He wanted to search trains, and he was like, "Can we type in train?" I'm like, "Yeah, here." And I like handed it to him, and he's like, "Where's the T? Like, what do I do?" Right? And like, he didn't know
Yeah,
how to type,
yeah.
and like, I grew up on whatever is getting really into my background, but I had pneumonia when I was in 5th grade,
Hmm.
and I was at home for 2 months recovering,
Ooh,
and my dad was early in IT, and we had a Commodore 64, which
nice.
old school computer, right? And I didn't know anything about it, didn't know anything about the history of it, but it was like came with this big bound manual. It's probably like 500 pages, and there was a whole section of games, but you had to type them all in BASIC to get it to play. It was like just like started with number guessing games and then a whole bunch of other stuff. And I remember by the end of those 2 months, I had learned BASIC by like copying BASIC out of this book because I was so bored. And then I flipped over to how to do graphics, and I was started like drawing stuff on the screen, which was super cool to me. Just because I could like type something in and it appeared on the screen. I was like, this is amazing. Um, and I kind of wonder if the younger generation is going to miss that,
Hmm.
right? Because now it's like the iPad is so locked in. Where's the experimentation coming from? They don't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to build anything to get it to work. I wanted a game, I had to build the game. Right? I was like, okay, and so it's a very different situation.
You have more Legos, more powerful Legos to build things than you ever have before, with
Yeah.
almost less curiosity on how to put them together in different ways. So you mentioned Commodore 64. My first computer was
Yeah.
a TI 99.
Ooh,
So
there you go.
yeah, some old school hardware.
Well,
I'm curious.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was
Sorry,
gonna
go
say
ahead.
it's funny you bring up Legos because my son has an iPad app that's from Lego that instead of all the instruction books, it walks you through step by step how to build everything.
Oh my
And he
gosh.
no longer just builds random things. He picks out what he's going to build off the iPad.
Oh
And so
wow.
the creativity isn't there, as you said, to just build random things. And so that is a little, I'm wondering what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, I
It's very
remember as a
cool.
kid we just had a bucket of Legos, and it really
Mhm.
wasn't like, here's your instruction manual. It was like, make something that kind of looks like a car with some wheel to like hit your brother with it. That's
I
sort
mean,
of what
there's
I
an
did.
app now that you take a picture of a pile of Legos and it will tell you what you can build
Oh,
with
that's
that
wild.
picture, right? And I'm like, where's the creativity? Like, you're telling me what to do.
It's being
Yeah.
engineered for you thanks to
Right.
the app. Um, your pneumonia experience is so interesting to me. Do you think that had any sort of impact on what you decided to do in your major? Like, what
Mhm.
if you weren't home for 2 months and you didn't have to learn BASIC and you stuck at the
100% it
computer?
did. It gave me that curiosity at a very young age.
Mhm.
Um, I was in middle school building my own computers because I was
Yeah.
just like, oh, like I've played basketball my whole life. It's not that I was just a nerd in my parents' basement the entire time. I was also an athlete and out there doing other things and whatever, but that was a hobby of mine for sure.
Mm.
And it helped that I had access to that because of my father's career. He used to force me to go to computer shows with him so that he could buy stuff for his company, and like, it's just like, this isn't, this is honestly the nerd convention of the weekend. And I have to go to this. I don't want to do that. But like, I learned a lot, and I'm thankful for it now for sure. It opened up other perspectives. And I think one of the biggest challenges that developers have, and I see this getting better every day, which is awesome, is they're very good at talking to computers and not very good at talking to humans. And that's also a part of why websites often don't involve consumers in that build process because they're just uncomfortable. People who are typically building these tools and the websites are uncomfortable talking to consumers.
Yeah, I think that's the the growth of the product owner role has become more and more and more important. My sister is graduating from Michigan State University, a degree in psychology.
Mm,
And she was going down this path of, what should I do? I don't want to go into clinical. I don't want to be social work. And
yeah.
so someone we had on the podcast, she runs a company called Alma Health, and she has a
Mm,
psychology background too, and became really instrumental in Facebook because she was helping think through what is the usability, what is the end user going to do, what is the psychology of what we're trying to execute on, and how is that going to impact the end user versus
mhm,
we're really smart technologists, let's make some smart technology, right? What
yeah.
does that user do? And that product owner role, that product management role has become more instrumental the more tools we have, the more Legos that we have that people are just assembling in different without creative ways. That product owner role is becoming more pivotal to be able to drive that creativity and end user outcome, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that is the number one role that we engage with at the Good because of all those reasons,
Hmm.
right? They're the ones who are fighting for these things internally at their company. And it's often an uphill climb. And so they bring us in to help expand those capabilities for a budget that they typically can't get for headcount, right? So they'll contract it out. Or it's they already know the answer because they've done the research, but they want third party validation to come in, right? That was exactly how we started working with Adobe a number of years ago now. They brought us in because they already have in house testing and optimization. They're a huge enterprise, but they could not get buy-in from everybody. And they thought, hey, we'll bring the Good in to do third-party validation. And
Hmm.
it was interesting. Um, I remember walking into the room the first meeting we had. They flew us out to their office in Utah and said, hey, come out for the day. We just want to talk to you. Like, we'll pay you a day rate, whatever, fly you out. We have a couple of questions. We think you can answer them. It's like, okay, great. Well, sure. You want to pay me to fly out to Utah? I'll go to Utah. And so went out and walked into the room. And I remember very clearly that there were 8 or 10 people around the table and they were clearly on two sides. And I was like, oh, this is weird. And here, they just sat down. So, okay, like we each want to present you our thoughts and we'd love to get your feedback. Quickly turned into, I realized that there were two diverging opinions here, and they wanted somebody to come in and settle the feud from an outside third party, basically.
Consult and
And
decide role, right?
yeah, and it was fine, but I kept coming back to like, well, how'd you come up with that? Where did that come from? We need to do some more research there. And here we are. I'm going to say it's been 7 years. We continue to work with them on on a rolling basis. It's great. And so that product owner role, though, that's our number one target client.
So for that, let's talk through acquiring that client. You make a lot
Mm,
of great content. Again, you open source all of your stuff. We call that the chocolate chip cookie model, right? Like you give
yeah,
the recipe, you'll sell the dough, you will do the whole thing. You'll sell the cookie, right?
yeah.
The whole thing from beginning to end. So you have really great content. You're writing books. Is most of your business coming through inbound now, or are you
Mm.
seeing things like you did in the early days, like, that's broken, we can fix that, and reaching out? What mechanism are you using?
Well, I would say that the number one way we acquire clients, we can't introduce pain, right? You either know you have a pain around your digital
Mm.
journey, or you don't. You're oblivious, or you know you have pain and you just don't have the resources to do anything about it, right? So we want that third of the pie that knows they have pain and has resources to do something about it. Those people are looking for, they're out doing their research, right? They're
Mhm.
looking for a solution provider. They're not, they may be asking friends, they may be, asking industry Slack groups or, wherever they're hanging out. But, you know, we want to be there when they start doing that research. And our content, we've always called it not content marketing, but expertise based marketing. Because the difference for me is we could just AI generate hundreds of articles and have tons of content and get traffic. I'm not really concerned about the amount of traffic we get. What I want is when that product owner comes to our site, reads an article, they say, yes, they are experts. They know what they're talking about. And I'm going to click on something else. Oh, wow. They have 3 books are all around this specific stuff that, were bestsellers on Amazon. Okay, great. That's a proof point. Oh, case studies. Yeah. They've worked with these large brands. Awesome. So really, we want to share our expertise as a means of being found and then having that validation. So that's how I look at it. I don't look at it as much as just having a content flywheel.
Mhm.
For me, it's I want that person who has a need and budget to come in and find us or be referred to us and then validate it, et cetera. So when we get on the phone with somebody to see if there's a good mutual fit, they generally already know there's a fit from their side.
No, I think that makes tons of sense, right? And Lauren and I talk about this quite a bit behind the scenes. At no point in history have you been able to reach more people. You can reach anyone you want. I can get the CEO of any company's email address today. And
Yeah.
at no point has it been harder to cut through the message or cut through the noise because people are generating 1,000 articles with ChatGPT, changing one word, pushing it out, and trying to SEO rush or SEO scalp something.
Yeah. Well, and think about outbound is so ineffective these days
Mm-hmm.
because of all the stuff you said. The number of emails I get, oh my gosh, like I spend 1 second and I'm like, oh, spam, spam, spam. Like, and if I filter it incorrectly and it really wasn't spam, I know they're going to follow up again. So,
Yeah.
like, okay, we'll find it. But I think that the best way to do this is expertise based marketing, but also maybe intent based. What I mean by that is, somebody's coming to your website who fits your ICP, ideal client profile. At that point, maybe it makes sense to do some more targeted outreach because they've already raised their hand, right? They've already said, "Oh, I've read this article. I know of you," or they may need some reminding of that. Like, I'm not afraid that when somebody comes to our site to just hit them up with a direct message on LinkedIn and say, "I saw you were on our site." Like, people know, you
Yeah.
can tell who's on your site these days. Like, it's not creepy like it used to be. And if they're creeped out by it, they're probably not in our ideal customer profile because our
100%.
ideal customer profile is doing this on their site, right?
Yeah.
So, it seems to work quite well.
So you've done a lot of experience-based marketing. You've written multiple books, which is fantastic. I'm just curious, what's that process like for you? It seems like a very daunting task. So I'm curious how you wrap your head around writing a 300-ish page book.
Yeah. Well, the first book was very daunting
Mm.
because had no idea what we were doing. Wrote it basically as a thesis paper. It was like, we're going to learn everything we can about conversion optimization. It's this industry that isn't really popular. There was only 1 or 2 other competitors globally doing this specifically. Let's find out what our point of view is. And that ended up being Stop Marketing, Start Selling. And as I mentioned at the time, it did well. It sold because it was provocative, which wasn't really the goal, but it was more like they're taking a stance that, is this true? Like, is this a problem? And so people were interested. Second book got easier because that book was called Opting Into Optimization. I wrote that during COVID. I said, what is the one thing I can do during COVID that coming out of this, I'm going to have used this time wisely?
Yeah.
And thought, okay, well, our perspective has changed. Now it's not about everyone's doing optimization, but they're often not doing it correctly. They're just A/B testing. So let's get people to understand why you should be doing optimization and how we think about it. Right. Again, sharing our entire knowledge base. Right. It was like, this is the playbook we run for clients. If you can opt into this playbook, you will have an optimized site. And then the third book, Behind the Click, that just came out about a month or so ago, that's a little different. It really got much easier because we had a playbook. And coming out of opt-in and optimization, we documented everything. We said, okay, we're going to document every step we took, the price that we paid for everything, where we got each resource that we needed, how we put this all together. And, ask my team, documentation is my love language. It's just something that we have. Our Notion is amazing to, like if I ever sell the good, that's the thing that has the value. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because writing this book was much, much easier because we knew how to do everything. I knew how I wanted to write it. I knew the process to do it. I knew where to go to do different, get the ISBN, how to talk to a publisher, where it's going to get printed, what the price point needed to be. All these check boxes that you have to go through became much easier just because we had it all documented, and it reduced the stress around it for sure. So there is a process you can put behind writing a book and make it a lot less stressful and daunting for sure.
That's really good info. And it's one thing that we've been working on in our own business. We call it dog with a note workflows. Like everything that we do, how can we make that workflow as like a dog with a note? You take a note, you pin it to a dog's collar, and you send that off to do the dirty work for you. It's like, if we can make a workflow that simple, we've done a good job. That's kind of how we look at these things now too. And it seems like your team is really process oriented as well.
Yeah. What we do for clients, we apply to ourselves. So
no, we love that. And this has been a lot of fun. We could probably go on forever asking questions and getting good feedback, make good content out of it. But we're coming up to time here. So I wanted to get to the last couple of questions that we have. Typically, one of the questions we really like to ask at this point is, if you could sit down, have dinner with yourself at 18, 25 years old, what does that conversation look like? What advice do you give yourself? Ignore the butterfly effect aspect of it, that it might change the outcome. Like, what advice would you give that person?
Well, I would hope I would change the outcome. I'm very happy where I'm at. Don't get me wrong. Looking back, I think entrepreneurs look forward so much they forget to look back, and I'm proud of what we've built over 15 years. But I would say the number one piece of advice would be, it's better to be in a good business than to be good at business. Right? There's an effect that is the push versus the pull. Is the business pulling you and you're uncomfortable because it's pulling you to grow? It's pulling you to scale. It's making you hire. It's making you have challenges of those sorts where I can't get enough people in here or whatever. Or are you pushing this large boulder up the hill every day and you're making it function? You're the one who has to be like, oh, this is really difficult. That push is so difficult. And that's where, if you're really skilled at business, you can push up a boulder and make it work, right? But if you don't have a good business, you're not in a good business, you're going to struggle, just burn out. It might not be you struggle in revenue, right? But you probably won't scale as large as you'd like. You're always going to be behind where you think you want to be. So looking at that, I would always say focus on the business first. And if you can match those two, have a really good business and be good at business, that's where the magic is really going to happen.
Gosh, that's a great, gosh, I never thought about that way, but that's so true. And I think we've both been good at business in previous roles where it's like, it was a Sisyphean task. We were like, oh my gosh, we can make this work. I'm going to break my back and probably, works 80 hours a week trying to make it happen, but we can do it, instead of focusing on like, hey, is this a great business that's challenging? And we're all on this team trying to make it better, all committed to that goal. So yeah, it's great.
It's really good information. I was smiling through the whole thing because, like, to Lauren's point, there were companies that we were a part of where there were a handful of people that you knew could get something done independent of the hurdle that they were across. And it was like the Mission Impossible team. And another person we talked to calls that team weaponized, right? You're dropping them in from the ceiling. They're making it happen, brute force, and then they're zipping out. It doesn't mean that the processes are good or the business itself, it was good, but they were SEAL Team 6 of business consulting.
Well, and if that's happening for the right reasons, right? Because the business is pulling you to do that and need that, great. Yeah. But if the business is not a great business and you have to bring those people in to push the help you push the boulder up the hill, right? that's a different situation.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Really
I'll remember
interesting.
that advice. Last question we typically ask is what are you listening to besides and reading besides
Mhm.
Behind the Click? What's on your podcast list? What's on your book list that we should read?
Well, you two are agency owners to some degree. So,
Mhm.
Two Bobs podcast,
Hmm.
if you're not familiar with that,
Oh,
two gentlemen, Blair Enns and David Baker. So for those in the professional services world, great podcast.
Hmm.
Um,
love that.
what I'm reading right now, actually, it's sitting right here, is and it's got a bunch of dog ears and notes on it, but it's called Into the Boardroom: How to Get Seats on Corporate Boards, which is
Cool.
I've been doing a lot of advising and board work lately, and it's a really interesting book. Super dry reading. I wouldn't recommend it for a vacation or anything, but it's very, very practical advice around how to advise brands and get on boards that will pay you to be on their
Yeah.
board,
Hmm.
which is something I'm really focused on and interested in right now because I want to. I am told that I'm pretty good at running a business. I have a lot of experience there now. I'd love to share that with other folks and help them understand if they have a good business or they're just good at business.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that a lot. And one more question. We said that was the last one. One more that we've been playing with every now and again, but I think you'll probably have a good answer for it. What is the last important thing you changed your mind about?
Ooh, last important thing I've changed my mind about.
Yeah, like not
Um,
that you're at Chipotle and you decided to get chicken versus steak or something like that. Like something important or
I
meaningful.
do love Chipotle. There was about 3 or 4 years there. I ate it for lunch every day because it was right next door and
Oh
is
yeah, it's consistent.
somewhat healthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I would say one of the things I've changed my mind on is screen time for my son. I feel like
Hmm.
that's pretty important. Um, I think I honestly think it's not as bad as a lot of folks have initially had this backlash. And the reason is I don't let him just sit there and watch YouTube or whatever. He has to be doing something interactive on it. So as long as he's being interactive, I'm okay with it. And
Got
that
it.
could be a game of some sort, but it would have to be a game. I don't know if you guys are familiar with things like Osmo. If you have
Yeah.
kids, you would be, but it's great where it makes them. It's a gamifies learning to some degree, and so I'm generally okay if he's not just watching YouTube Kids. Right, that's the one
Yeah.
part that really kind of I don't like. But I don't have as much of an issue with screen time as my wife does per se. She can't stand it. She's like, get the iPad away. But she's also on reading all the parenting blogs and stuff. So maybe
And
she's
I think that that's a good distinguishing point is that there's a differential between good screen time and bad screen time.
Mhm.
Consuming TikTok and doom scrolling, bad. Interacting, making your neurons fire, solving problems, learning, very
Yeah.
good. So it's not all the same.
Yeah. The last thing I did that I thought was really great for my productivity overall was to set up parental controls on my own phone,
Mm,
and set a timer limit for apps. So I set a 15-minute per day limit on Instagram. And
I
so
love
now
that.
it pops up and I can override it with my pin
Sure.
or FaceTime or whatever, but Face ID, but it always jolts me. I'm always like, whoa, it's been 15 minutes. Like,
Yes.
cause it always hits me and I'm not expecting it. Um,
I did the
and
same thing, but I gave
very
myself an
telling.
hour because I have less control than you do.
Yeah. Well, I also don't do anything but I don't do anything with work on Instagram. So I don't need to
Yeah.
have it up. Right. I
Yeah.
could not have it on my phone and still it would not impact my daily life. So take it for what it's worth. But I that's been one of the most productive things I've done recently.
Oh, it's a good life
Awesome.
hack. I'm gonna do that.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
John,
go ahead.
I was going to let you wrap it up, but
Sorry.
I can cut. I'll cut this part out. I gotta say, we've been getting a lot better at not stepping on each other as we've gone through
Yeah.
this. The first, like maybe episodes 1 through 5, not so great. We'd step on each other a lot. We're getting better at giving each other hand signals, so like covering a mouth, being like, "I'm not going to talk next." So This time I failed. I'll cut this little ramble out. But as we wrap up, John, really great advice. It was amazing hearing your story, how the domino of having a size 16 shoe almost changed the course of your life, which is fascinating to think about. And then I guess catching pneumonia when you were younger too.
Yeah.
Again, another thing that changed the trajectory of your life. Really fascinating having you on. Great story, great advice. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much. And go get Behind the Click.
Yeah, by all means, you can get a copy of it at thegood.com/BTC for Behind the Click. And if you go, we actually have a discount code you can use. I believe it's just BTC podcast 50. So BTC podcast 50 get you 50% off a copy if you buy it directly from us. So passing the savings that we get for publishing it on to the readers. But yeah, would great to hear any feedback you have on the book if you do read it. And I appreciate you having me on the show today.
Thank you so much, John.
Awesome. Thank you.